Hi, everybody. So, did you know what is the word of 2021, as Merriam-Webster Dictionary says it? It's resilience. So I think that if by the end of this conference, Merriam-Webster Dictionary does not change it to NFT, I quit, honestly. Because if somebody hasn't tried to explain to you what a non-fungible token is in the last 12 months, you're either living under a rock or you have the gift of selective hearing, and I'm jealous. So, NFTs, this three-letter word that's gotten us all hyped up. We started asking questions like, what can it give us access to? What can we create with it? Can we find freedom, new business models? Can we unlock creativity? So I see NFTs as a text-modern counterculture movement. And the reason I'm so fascinated by subcultures and counterculture is because that is exactly where social commentary starts and change begins. So if we think in the essence of what NFTs are, think of it as a file type, as a JPEG, MP3, MP4, and it has the power to not only reinvent certain industries, but create completely new ones. So NFTs went from completely unheard of to overhyped to now slowly becoming the standard of ownership for digital goods. And I think the same way how you don't think of typing HTTP every time you type in a website into a web browser, the same way the function of NFTs is going to start to fade into the background. And what's going to come to the foreground is the things that it gives us access to be able to experience. So the question I wanted to ask is exactly how can NFTs help us better express ourselves in the metaverse? So I'd like to start with a very sobering slide, and the reason actually that I'm really interested in the NFT movement. So this is a picture of one of my favorite places, Sequoia Forest, that was caught on fire. And we've seen our world go through a lot of different changes. We've seen radical weather events ravage a lot of our continents. And I think that the words of a very famous journalist, Naomi Klein, she says that there is no non-radical future ahead of us, which basically means that either way, we're going to have to face changes, positive or negative. So this talk is not about climate change, but I would like to draw a parallel between NFTs and the close relationship it actually has to our circumstances and how it can help us reinvent creative industries. So NFTs as tools for anti-exploitation. New technologies don't inherently change power dynamics, but they do help us call them into question. So what is different about NFTs that instead of it being just a technology, it is also a movement, and not just a movement, but also a change in the way that we're thinking from hierarchies to a networked worldview. And the thing that I wanted to bring attention to is that since the Industrial Revolution, we've had a pretty extractive relationship with nature and also the way we view human resources. And I think NFTs can help us redesign the incentive structure between the creator and fan relationship. So the relationship between creators and fans has been broken for a while, but it's interesting to note that the NFT movement is being driven primarily by creatives who have very much been dependent on distributors for their work. So if we think of creative output as water, then people that distribute it are the ones that control the pipes, essentially. So most creators don't make money directly from their fan base. Most fans very rarely see any compensation from actually contributing to the creator's success. And both parties just want more control over ownership and the things that they're able to create. So this is not really isolated just to arts and music, and fashion also struggles with the exact same thing, where who gets to design the clothes, how they get produced, where do they go when stock is extra, where does it go, does it get burnt, does it get discarded? So the thing that I really would like to ask is, why fashion? Why should we start considering this industry? So in the case, I think the case for digital music and digital art has already been made by lots of artists, musicians, several NFT platforms, but fashion has largely remained very unchanged over the last couple of decades and is really due for a makeover. So it's an industry with a $2 trillion market cap, and a recent report from Fashion for Good said that in order for fashion industry to reach climate targets, they have to invest $20 to $30 billion more, which is 3 times that it's investing now, to actually help move the industry forward. So changing human behavior is incredibly difficult if you're conditioned to constantly want more things. So if you cannot reduce the rate of consumption, you have to at least work on reducing production by bringing companies and individuals to resources that help them earn additional revenue through digital means. And fashion as an industry, I think, is being given a golden opportunity to leverage NFTs to actually incorporate it into its business model and rethink it fundamentally. So in the words of Chris Dixon, fashion is a great offline analogy for NFTs that is composable, bottoms-up adoption, has subcultures and niche communities. I would also add to this list that it gives you much better control over your brand narrative and the story you actually want to tell, and it facilitates much better peer-to-peer interactions, especially when it comes to secondary markets and sales. So this is, again, numbers that I just mentioned, if you wanted to kind of see the scale of the industry. So the composable aspect of NFTs allows designers to actually co-create assets, garments with their fan base. And the authentication mechanism of NFTs allows fans to actually profit from the creations that they get to co-create and invest. So I don't remember when was the last time my clothes, let's say non-luxury clothes, are able to appreciate in value, but NFTs will allow for that to happen. So in this new paradigm where the designer becomes the facilitator and the fan becomes a co-creator of these same assets, what exactly can fashion NFTs give us access to? So I would like to also kind of give you a picture of what fashion, I guess like, where does fashion stand in relation to technology? So fashion has two primary use cases: function, which is clothing that allows us to, be able to go outside when it's cold. And it also has a very important aspect that has to do with fun, which is about your identity, how you would like to express yourself. And we've been incubating our virtual identities from the very moment we started to create our usernames online. And the cool thing about that is that our online persona communicates the digital myth of who we are and signals that to the world. So both fashion and NFTs have a lot to do with personalization and identity. And I think as more virtual worlds start to emerge within the space, our human desire to customize and make things our own is going to persist within the metaverse. And that is a very human thing. Like if you think of you as a teenager and how you would decorate your space and how you're finding your style, I think that process is very natural and will continue to exist in virtual spaces. So in physical reality, if your shirt is black, it's going to remain black. But in virtual spaces, clothing becomes like a canvas where you're able to add interactivity to it, you're able to capture memories, and it can serve as access to both online and offline experiences. So two of the driving mechanisms behind NFTs, it's socio-cultural appeal in terms of how it actually mirrors and reflects culture, and its ability to do what physical objects just can't, which is change in response to information and to stimulus. And that is exactly what generative NFTs are all about. So CryptoKitties was the very first successful generative NFT project, and it showed us that the joy of discovery, algorithmic collaboration with computers, with other parties, adding randomization, made people very invested collectors. So generative NFTs, in my opinion, are the building blocks of the customization within virtual spaces. And while fashion offers customization in real life through fabrics and maybe unique brick and mortar experiences, in digital spaces, NFTs can be personalized through generative textures that can then be embedded with various metadata. So as an example, you can add interactivity to assets by adding nested information such as photos, videos, pictures. You can add other rich metadata. You can create surprising or random outcomes, which essentially gives you that joy of anticipation. And it's kind of the anti-instant reward mechanism, which is what our internet is currently full of. And it also builds incentive structures for you to be able to allow your fans to profit from the designer's success, which is exactly where we began this questioning. And there's no manufacturing, delivering, packages, production that is involved in this process in comparison to how that actually functions within the physical industry. And as a real-world component, you can also allow these NFTs to give you access to special events, to games, narratives, and other resources. So I'd like to ask you one final question. Just because we can create all of this, I don't think we necessarily should. So when we're talking about NFTs or fashion NFTs, who exactly are we trying to build these experiences for? And did you notice how in recent years there's been a lot of apocalyptic films and different media that kind of, there's zombie apocalypse, there's aliens invading Earth, there's superheroes saving us from a dilapidated world. And I think science fiction in many ways doesn't just try to predict the future, it also very much reflects the fears that we currently have. And I think that you can see that in movements like cyberpunk, steampunk, Blade Runner dystopias. And I think it's easy to imagine a world where we've failed and we essentially, access to quality products becomes a luxury and things like NFTs or digital fashion become like poor man's invisible clothes. So I want to introduce you to a movement that's been giving me a lot of hope called solar punk. And it is an idea of a future where humanity does rise to the challenges that it's facing, and it's able to leverage technology to actually reach collective prosperity. So this may not sell as many movies, but I do think this movement is definitely dominating the Web3 scene and the thinking that is present within that scene. So this is just day one. The conference has been amazing so far. But what I think is going to be really cool is that the most important conversations are not just happening here. They're going to be happening in Discords, in Telegram groups, on Zoom chats, where people are scheming and getting together to really put these ideas into action. So if you haven't thought of fashion before with overlapping with NFTs, I think it's time. So now, many of you here have never asked permission to actually start pioneering within this space. So I just wanted to say thank you for doing so. And to that I say, to infinity and beyond. Thanks.